My study focuses on the consequences associated with excluding LGBT history from classrooms and grades K through 12. And within that context, the survey contained within this study examines how a group of college students who attended grade school or high school in New York have been affected. It looks at uncertainty reduction theory, and the whole basis is how the more you know about people or a certain group increases your familiarity and reduces the chance that you're going to form harmful stereotypes which stem into prejudice. And the findings indicate that there is a need for this LGBT inclusive curriculum because prejudice is currently a frequent occurrence, and providing this education would be beneficial and feasible for numerous reasons. I just want to talk quickly about the prejudice in society, just a couple of things. There's employment discrimination, where in 29 states being gay is enough to get you fired, and in 34 being transgender is reason enough. And one of the other things is hate crimes. Hate crimes on the basis of sexual orientation, based on an FBI 2012 annual report, are the second most leading cause. They fall at 19.3% of all reported crimes, and race falls at 48.3%. And this is important because in schools, the histories of various races, such as the Black Civil Rights Movement, are required to be taught, but the history of LGBT people are not. That plays into the level of prejudice being higher for LGBT persons. Gay and Lesbian Straight Education Network released a 2011 study, National School Climate Study, which revealed that 2/3 of students, 67.5%, in schools without an inclusive curriculum had felt unsafe in the past month due to their sexual orientation, compared to only 43.4% in schools with an inclusive curriculum. Twice as many students in schools without an inclusive curriculum experienced higher severities of victimization compared to students in schools with an inclusive curriculum. I also released state snapshots, and I chose to compare Alabama, California, and New York. Alabama is the state which offers the least protections for LGBT individuals. California is the only state that requires LGBT history to be taught, and they've done this since July 1st, 2012. And New York is the real subject of this paper because I would like New York to follow California's footsteps. There's numerous benefits to inclusive curriculum, and a couple of these are prejudice reduction and a positive sense of self. Jonathan Matsuwitz, a professor at the University of Central Florida, linked knowledge, stereotyping, and prejudice. The formation of stereotypes is linked to a lack of education and familiarity. So the less familiar you are with something or someone, the more likely you are to create false stereotypes, and again, these stem into prejudice. Also, John Quick, in his article, Prejudice Elimination as an Educational Aim, states that education fosters an ability within students to support their points of view with evidence or reason, as well as to have an open mind and be empathetic. So that's how education can reduce prejudice. In addition, it fosters a positive sense of self because if LGBT inclusive curriculum were to be required, students who are LGBT would see themselves in that curriculum and other people would see them. And it's kind of the idea of a window and a mirror, which Emily Stile came up with in 1988. Listen, again, the Gay and Lesbian Straight Education Network references this and said that with the window, students who are not LGBT would gain an accurate picture of history, a level of understanding and acceptance toward those within the community, and a lessening of stereotypes. The mirror would validate the existence and experiences of LGBT individuals, boost or reinforce self-esteem, and give them a voice. So despite the problems of prejudice that we're seeing and the benefits that inclusive curriculum could have, California is the only state that requires the recognition of LGBT historical accomplishments in social science classrooms. And it's done that since January 1st, 2012, under the Fair Education Act. A few resources that could be utilized if New York were to require the same as California. A couple of these that I'd like to talk about are Listens, Ready, Set, Respect, and also Unheard Voices. Ready, Set, Respect is geared towards kindergarten through 5th grade and educates students about gender roles and family diversity. Unheard Voices is for grades 6 through 12 and includes interviews with individuals who witnessed or took part in LGBT history, transcripts of those interviews, classroom handouts, discussion questions, activities, assignments, and thematic lessons. There is also Films. Youth in Motion is a program that's run by the Gay Straight Alliance and Frameline, and they send out LGBT historical films along with curriculum guides that are designed to foster a classroom discussion. They send these out free. And there's also some films that people would be able to buy and use in the classroom. One of these is the Christine Jorgensen story. This is a documentary of the life of Christine Jorgensen. She is regarded as the first American to receive transitional surgery and hormones. There's also a couple of books. A couple of these are Gay in America, Struggle for Equality by Linus Alcinas, and Transgender History by Susan Stryker. All of this information kind of led to developing my own study at Casanova College to gain an understanding of how much college students knew about LGBT history before college, whether or not they were taught it, and what prejudice they experienced or witnessed on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity in correlation. A total of 216 students over the age of 18, out of a total of under 1,000 students studying at the college, replied to an anonymous campus-wide survey sent via email. The study received approval from the Institutional Review Board. So they asked a little bit about what they were familiar with. A couple of these things were the Stonewall riots, Bayard Rustin, the Compton cafeteria riots, and Christine Jorgensen. So the Stonewall riots are known as the kickoff to the gay rights movement, and they began on June 28, 1969. This was the first time that people who were gay were actually fought back when the police raided the Stonewall in New York City. 73.4% were unaware of the riots prior to taking the survey. 9.5% were unsure, and only 17.1% were aware. Rustin was an openly gay man who fought alongside Martin Luther King Jr., and 82.3% were unaware of him, 9.5% were aware, and 8.2% were unsure. The Compton cafeteria riots was a prominent moment in the transgender rights movement. 77.2% of participants were not at all familiar with the riots, 12% were slightly familiar, 7% were somewhat familiar, and 3.2% were moderately familiar. Only 0.6% were extremely familiar, and 10.2% did not answer. Christine Jorgensen, again, were extremely familiar with her, and 1.9% were moderately familiar. A total of 83.4% were not at all familiar, 9.6% were slightly familiar, 4.5% were somewhat familiar. In addition to the low levels of familiarity with certain LGBT historical events and icons, there's also a high level of prejudice within the schools during grade school and high school. 6% strongly agreed to hearing anti-gay remarks often in grade school, 27.5% agreed, and on the basis of hearing anti-transgender remarks often in grade school, 9.8% strongly agreed, 16.3% agreed. And when high school began, anti-gay and anti-transgender remarks increased. 35.5% strongly agreed to hearing anti-gay remarks often, 43.4% agreed, and 17% strongly agreed to hearing anti-transgender remarks often in high school, 26.8% agreed. And in correlation with this, 87.3% were not taught LGBT history in grade school. 63.1% weren't taught it in high school. So this research indicates that there's a high level of prejudice towards people who are LGBT, towards citizens and students, a low level of knowledge of LGBT history, and that education can reduce prejudice through increased familiarity. Safer school and societal environments can be created through education. Furthermore, there are a plethora of free or inexpensive materials that teachers can pull from in order to implement this curriculum. If it were to require LGBT history as part of the curriculum in grades K through 12, it would be both beneficial and feasible. Thank you.